Being born is probably the most important thing that will ever happen to you. Not because it's an achievement, you didn't do anything, it just happened. And that's kind of the point. You didn't choose to be here. No one does. Every single person who has ever lived was drafted into existence without their consent. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment there was a conscious being that would eventually experience pain, loss, fear, anxiety, illness, aging, and death. And we treat that as completely normal. In fact, we treat it as unquestionably good. But why? That's the question at the heart of antinatalism. Not whether parents love their children, most do. Not whether life contains joy, it obviously does. The question is whether creating a new person is automatically a good thing simply because that's what humans have always done. Because if we're being honest, most people don't spend much time thinking about it. They decide whether they can afford children, and whether they want children, or whether they'd be good parents, which are all reasonable questions. But very few people stop and ask whether existence itself is a gift to the person being created. We just assume it is. And maybe that's because we're not exactly unbiased observers. After all, everyone having this discussion is already alive. The people who enjoy existing get a vote, and the people who never existed don't. So right from the start, the conversation is tilted towards the perspective of those who made it into the room. Now obviously life contains wonderful things. We have love and friendship, art, discovery, laughter, good food, and bad movies you somehow enjoy anyway. No one is denying that. The problem is that suffering isn't optional. Every person you create will suffer. Not might suffer, they will. They'll get sick, they'll lose the people they love, and they'll experience disappointment, grief, fear, embarrassment, and pain. And if they live long enough, they'll watch their bodies gradually fall apart. That's the deal. That's what comes in the box. The only question is how much suffering they'll experience before it's over. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because we tend to think about life from the perspective of people who are currently doing okay. Most people having children while they're relatively young, healthy and energetic and optimistic. Their backs still work, their knees haven't declared independence, and their organs are still cooperating. The worst parts of life are still abstract. Something that happens later to older people, to somebody else. But then decades pass and the pain starts, the health problems arrive, friends and family begin to disappear, and the body becomes a machine that requires constant maintenance just to achieve mediocrity. And by then, the children are already here. Sometimes they already have children of their own. It's almost like evolution schedules reproduction before you get a full understanding of what the product really is, which from evolution's perspective makes perfect sense. Evolution doesn't care whether you're happy, evolution doesn't care whether life is worth living. Evolution has just one goal, which is to make more evolution. And if that means convincing you that reproduction is the most meaningful thing you can do, well, that's a pretty effective strategy. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Should life exist at all? Not human life specifically, life, the entire thing. We tend to treat the answer as obvious. Of course life should exist. Of course being alive is better than not being alive. Case closed. But that's not actually self-evident. Someone who never exists never experiences joy, that's true. But they also never experience suffering. They never get cancer, they never lose a child, they never suffer depression. They never spend years watching their bodies deteriorate. In fact, every problem a person can possibly have is completely avoided by never existing in the first place. That doesn't prove antinatalism is correct, far from it. A lot of people would argue that the good parts of life outweigh the bad parts. That meaning comes from overcoming suffering. That existence, despite all its flaws, is worth the price of admission. And maybe they're right. But notice what happened. The moment we start discussing whether life is worth creating, we've left the realm of facts and entered the realm of values. There isn't a scientific answer to this question, and there's no mathematical proof for it. There's just a judgment about whether the joy of life justifies the inevitable suffering that comes with them. And different people can reach different conclusions. So here's the problem with having children. It's one of the biggest decisions anyone can make, but it's often treated as one of the most automatic. We create entirely new conscious beings without their consent. We know they will suffer, we know they will die. And yet we rarely stop to examine the assumptions that make the whole process seem obviously good. Maybe life is worth living and maybe it isn't. But if we're going to create new people, the least we can do is think about the question before answering it on their behalf.